Hello my friends, Amy R here with Prairie Paper and Ink and a couple of cards using the newer Gerber Daisy stamp set from Picket Studios. And I'm going to show you guys how I achieved a rainbow of colors with very simple watercoloring using only 3 inks. So if you keep watching, I'll show you guys how I made these 2 cards and how I did this watercolor. And as always, links to all the things are in the description box below the video. So if you just expand that, there's links to all the supplies I used. And let's get into making the cards. My original intent was to only create 1 card. But then once I got started, I couldn't stop because I was having fun. Which is usually like how things are. So I've got this Brighter Days Gerber Daisy stamp. This stamp, like I said, it's a big floral. I love it. Love anything big floral. So I have some distress watercolor paper, and I grabbed this out of my pack, and I was like, I think I can fit, like I could stamp this image on here twice. So then I was like, oh, well, why not make more than 1 card? So it just, like I said, it just kind of kept like snowballing. So I used my anti-static powder on the watercolor paper. That just helps prevent the embossing powder from clinging to anything other than the stamped image. And I'm inking up and stamping this Gerber Daisy multiple times. It's a large stamp. I want to make sure I get all of it stamped, and that's why I'm like lifting my MISTI, because I'm tilting it in the light, because when you're stamping with clear embossing ink onto white watercolor paper, you know, light color paper, it is very difficult to see. But if you tilt it in the light, you can see, like, you know, what's stamped, what's not. So I just repeated that, and then I shifted the watercolor paper down so I could stamp it a second time. And then off camera, I end up stamping it actually a third time, and like as the cards come together, it'll make sense. But after I stamped them, I coated them with some detail white embossing powder and tapped off the excess. And then same thing, just made sure I got all of the images completely covered with the embossing powder, tapping off the excess. And then I'm going to melt all of this with my heat tool. And even though it's white on white, I love it when it actually shows up on camera, because it almost like disappears. Okay, it's like magic. I love heat embossing. It will never grow old, even after over 20 years of doing this. I love melting embossing powder. I don't know. Anyway, making sure everything is melted so that it's smooth and shiny. You just, again, tilt it in the light. If there's any dull, grainy areas, hit them with the heat tool. We're good to go. So I got all my images stamped and heat embossed. And then this first bit, this is going to look like a hot mess. This is intentional. It's not supposed to look nice. And you could skip this blending portion if you wanted. However, I did this on purpose because for me personally, while I love rainbow everything, like rainbow colors, rainbow color schemes, you know, all the things, I get very hung up sometimes on things being in rainbow order, you know. Like they're supposed to go in the order of the rainbow. Doing this helps me kind of get over that. So I'm blending 3 different distress inks over these images. And it's the Picked Raspberry, Mustard Seed, and Mermaid Lagoon. These are my like just 3 go-tos. If you want, like, you know, to create a rainbow of colors, these 3 work. The only thing I'll switch out sometimes is I'll use peacock feathers instead of Mermaid Lagoon. So, okay, it just depends on mood. But those 3 distress inks and then a blending brush. And you can see I'm just blending, and this looks like a hot mess. It's fine. It's fine. So where the colors overlap is where you start getting the other colors. So the blue and the yellow make green. The pink and the yellow make orange. The blue and the pink make purple. Hence rainbow colors. So I just added them with the blending brush. And I've kind of followed, once I, you know, had it figured out on one, I just followed sort of the same thing on the other 2. They still won't be the exact same in the end, but it was just simpler this way. And then I used my microfiber cloth to just wipe off any ink that was sitting on top of the heat embossing. You could skip that step because I do it later again, but it's also just habit. So I did all that. Everything looks like a hot mess, but this is where it all starts coming together. I took those same 3 inks and I just pressed them onto my little watercolor palette. Any non-porous surface will work. I've shown in my videos in the past, like I've used like stamp packaging, literally anything that's non-porous. So I pressed them onto my little watercolor palette, and then I'm just using my little, this is my Tim Holtz Detail water brush. This is the same brush I have been using for close to a decade, maybe longer. I'm not even sure. This thing's old. Still available, still works great. And off to the side, off camera, I do have a cloth that I just wipe the brush off when, you know, I'm switching between colors, things like that. And then you just paint. And because I have this mess going on behind the behind the stamped image, I'm just following what's there. So where the colors are blended to make orange, I will paint orange. So I mix a bit of the mustard seed and a bit of the picked raspberry to make an orange color, and I paint it. And same with the areas where it was blended with green. I, you know, mix the mustard seed and the peacock feathers to make a green. And I just keep going around and doing that with each of the petals, the leaves, etc. And yeah, this is where, for me, having that everything kind of ink blended ahead of time really, you know, keeps me from overthinking like exactly where the colors need to go, you know, to stay in rainbow order. Because if I was just to paint this like myself with these 3 inks, I would go in just can't. It's really hard to break that habit. Like I would, you know, start on one whatever side and go pink, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, you know, just have it. So doing it this way, it really sort of mixes it up a little bit more. It's a little more organic. It's fun. And anyone can do this. This is so simple. I'm not doing any sort of, you know, special techniques or anything other than just swirling the colors together, which is still fairly simple. The only thing you need to be aware of is if you mix all 3 colors together and the secondary colors, you'll start to create mud. And I actually do that on purpose for the flower centers. So you mix a little bit of the pink and the yellow, and I add a bit of green and add a bit of blue, yada, yada, yada. And it gets kind of a muddy color, which is kind of nice for a flower center. So once I did one, the other 2, just the exact same process. So I've just super sped this up in editing, but it's the same process. And it's fun. It was fun to kind of see like how much brighter, you know, because everything looks a little dull because I only did a very light blending. And just how much brighter everything looks as you start painting on the different colors onto the image. And I followed it fairly like closely, but it doesn't obviously have to be exact with where the colors, you know, happen to fall onto this image. And that's why, you know, some of the petals have greens on them. I was fine with that. You know, this was a lot of fun. And I love how vibrant it is. And also because like, really, Gerber daisies come in every colors. I actually planted. I talk about my black thumb all the time. I don't have luck with plants more often than not. But I did plant. It wasn't a Gerber daisy because those don't grow where I live. But it was like a type of coneflower, and it actually has green petals, like pink at the very like base, and then they go to like neon green. We'll see if it survived the winter. But it was so unique. I'm like, I have never seen a flower like this with like green petals. So it happens in nature too. Anyway, I went along, painted both these 2 remaining images with the colors on my palette, and, you know, everything's getting really mixed up. And what I was originally going to do, in the back of my head, I was going to use my picket fence liquid paper splatter in the liquid white snowflake, which you could totally do if this intimidates you, because I'm doing like every color of splatter on these because I could. But that's what I was originally going to do, and it would look awesome because you'd get the shimmery splatter, which looks fabulous. But as I was looking at these, I was like, I have all this ink sitting on my palette. Why not? So I'm just taking a little brush. This is a little tiny size 2 brush. And I was swirling it into the ink, adding a little extra water, and then doing somewhat controlled splatter. Somewhat controlled. You can't fully control splatter. That's kind of the beauty of it, is it just likes to go where it wants. But using a little tiny brush like this, plus I've done bajillions of splatters on my cards over how many years, I can sort of control it, but not really. So I'm just sort of aiming the brush in those sections. So I was, putting the yellow splatter where the yellow was, the blue where the blue was, etc., etc. But again, it's not fully controlled. It still kind of goes where it wants. I'm fine with that. This was just a nice way to add even more, like some texture and just fun. So I just worked my way around with all the different colors, adding these splatters. And like I said, you can skip this, and if splatters are not your thing, skip it completely. Or if you still want to add some splatter, something like that liquid white snowflake is fabulous. I love that stuff. I'll put a link to it in the supplies. Because yeah, it's like perfect for just simple shimmery splatter without, going to all the lengths that I went to here doing however many different colors. So I did all the splatter, all the things. I let these completely dry. Didn't take very long, but I let them completely dry because you don't want to like die cut, rub your hands on this, anything until things are dry. Otherwise it's going to smear. But once everything was dry, this is where I took the microfiber cloth again and just gently rubbed it over these images. And that just removes any of the ink, the splatter, etc. that's sitting on specifically the white heat embossed image, because the heat embossing resists all that ink, splatter, etc. So that just removes it, cleans everything up. We're good to go. So after I did that, I used the coordinating wafer die to die cut these out, and I just taped that into place with little bits of washi tape so that the wafer die doesn't shift when I run this through my die cut machine. So I'm going to die cut the one, and then I'll just repeat the exact same process on the other two florals. And then for my background, I am using more distressed watercolor paper. And I'm using this fabulous Indian Summer stencil. I love this stencil. I love this pattern. I'm going to be reaching for this one a lot. So the watercolor paper right now is A2 size. So 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I was just working on one of my little Picket Fence paper inking palettes, a little grippy, a little grip mat to hold it holds the paper in place. It can technically hold the stencil in place, but I'm using the small one. So there's not a lot of, leeway, but the larger one, when I filmed this, I couldn't find it because those that know me, I am not near as organized as people think I am. And I can't find things half the time. Anyway, it still worked. So I blended hickory smoke distress ink over this stencil onto the watercolor paper just to create like a soft neutral background, because I want the flowers to like pop on this background. So I did that blending, and then I sprayed some water with my distress sprayer. You can't really tell as much in the video, but it gives it that little bit of watermarks and splotchiness. And then to enhance it, I'm going to add more splatter because that's what we do. So I just took that same hickory smoke and I just mushed it onto my glass work surface. Use that same little tiny brush and just added splatter to both of these backgrounds. It just, gives it that little extra something. So got that on all of these, and then I'm going to let both of these backgrounds dry, which again doesn't take very long because it was just distress ink. And then for my card bases, which are going to be top folding A2 white note cards, I'm using that stencil again on the insides and that same hickory smoke distress ink, but I'm going in with a lighter hand with my blending brush. So I'm not, adding in like it being too dark, because I need it to be light enough so that you can easily write over it, with a ballpoint pen, and it's actually legible. So I just use a bit of a lighter hand, and I've got a little bit of post-it tape there. That's right where the score line is for the card, so that I don't add ink, past the score line, to keep it a little cleaner, a little crisper. So blended that onto the insides, set those aside, and then I pulled out a piece of black cardstock. And I'm using sentiments from that same Gerber Daisy stamp set. And I'm going to line them all up onto this cardstock. I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool. Again, just habit. It helps. Huge game changer. Love my anti-static powder. So put the anti-static powder onto the cardstock. Put this back into the MISTI. This time I'm inking up the stamps with white pigment ink. You don't have to do this. I jump between this and clear embossing ink. It just, honestly, it literally depends on my mood. I do think it helps, especially like on dark cardstock like this, to stamp sentiments with white pigment ink. I don't know. It just, I think the biggest thing too is just it's a lot easier to see. Like, oh, okay, I got the whole everything, you know, whatever it is I'm stamping, stamped, you know, before I add the embossing powder. So, and with that, with the pigment ink, I generally like am tapping it very lightly on my stamps. And then I'll just stamp them multiple times, which you saw, just over and over again, because I'm not pressing too hard. So that way I can get all the detail, and I'm not like, you don't smush your stamps, you know, you don't need to perform CPR on them. And yeah, it's better to build it up in light little layers than to just, you know, smush your ink pad into the stamp, smush the stamp onto the cardstock, and then you know, your sentiments end up looking wonky, or if it's a fine detail, you know, image, that sort of a thing. That's how a lot of times you lose that detail. So after I did the heat embossing on those sentiments, I used a coordinating wafer dies. I cut them out, and then my backgrounds are dry. So now I've trimmed those down to about 4 by 5 1/4, just slightly smaller than the A2 card front. And then to start adhering these florals, I figured out where I wanted to place. So this one card front, it gets just this one floral. So I figured out where I wanted to place it, held it in place. I flipped this over and I placed up, you know, I just drew a pencil line right where the edge of that card front is going to be. And this just helps me see where this is going to go, and so that I don't apply any adhesive past that little pencil line. So it keeps everything a little cleaner, makes it a little easier. Plus, once I've got all of this foam tape in place, this is Simon Says Stamps Big Mama foam tape. So I got that into place, peel off the backing, and I actually just leave this upside down, and I just meet the edge of the card front with where that pencil line is. So I just kind of use that as my little visual, and I can just press that down and it's adhered into place. And then I'm going to adhere my card front to my card base just using craft tacky glue. And I still got that piece hanging over the edge. That's fine. I'm waiting until I get this adhered before I trim off the excess, because I'm just going to trim off where it hangs over the actual card base. So I get that card front adhered onto the card base, and then I can flip the card over and then trim off that excess with my scissors. And then for this one, for the sentiment, I'm using the another Hello There word die set. I am obsessed with this die set. I've used it on many cards. I love it. So I die cut the hello word from black cardstock, and I'm using the scrap piece, like the leftover piece, just as a placement, like to give me the spacing of these die cut letters. Plus it shows me exactly where I need to place my little foam squares. I don't do this very often. I've talked about this before. I don't like mucking around with like little tiny pieces of foam tape, you know, specifically for sentiments. But this sentiment, and that's probably why I like it so much, it's hefty. You know, it's got a good weight to it, so I don't have to trim like slivers of foam tape, you know? So I popped up those letters with just thin little foam squares. And then I adhered one of the sentiments to the inside with craft tacky glue. And then for the second card front, I'm doing the exact same thing, except this time I'm using both of the flowers and just positioning them slightly different, but the exact same method. So held it in place, flipped it over, traced with a pencil where the edges of the card front are to give me, you know, that little visual of where I need to put my foam tape. So get the foam tape into place, peel off the backing, and then I can just line up the card front with those pencil lines, just like so, press it into place, and then adhere this card front to the other card base. And then I'm going to do the same thing. Once this is adhered into place, I can then flip this over and trim off the excess with my scissors, just using the edge of the card base as my guide. So got all that trimmed off. And then I'm going to adhere the other sentiments that I chose for this card. So once I, figured out where I wanted to place them, again, a couple little foam squares just on the parts that are overhanging where the floral ends and then the card base begins. So got those adhered into place. And then I'm going to adhere those other sentiments to the inside of the cards. And then as my final little bit of embellishment, I pulled out this is another one of my go-to favorites. This is the Neutral Hearts Embellishments mix from Picket Fence. And it's got those little clay hearts that I just love. But there's white ones, gray ones, and black ones. And I was like, oh, perfect. They're like made for this card. So I used all three. I left off the little sequins. Those would look cute too, though. They would have added a little bit of shine. But I just put several of those little hearts just onto the backgrounds of both of these cards. And then once I was happy with where I'd placed them, I'm just going to adhere these into place with little dabs of craft tacky glue. Just picking them up with my little embellishment wand and then pressing them into the little dots of glue and just making sure that they're upright. That is another like little OCD thing of mine, is hearts need to be like upright. It just is. It just is. So that's where liquid glue always comes in handy, you know? So I got a few seconds to zhuzh things around. So once I got everything adhered into place, these cards are complete. So like I said in the intro, I will have links to all the supplies I used in the description box below the video. So if you expand the description box, all of the links will be there, all the supplies listed, linked. You can check that out below if you're interested. And as always, thank you all so very much for watching, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't. Would love to have you. And I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye.